Rain in Pittsburgh has a particular sound when it hits the metal awning over Mr. Kareem's grocery on East Ohio Street, a flat tin patter, almost cheerful, like somebody tapping their fingers on a desk. I was listening to it through my open window when the phone rang on a Tuesday morning in October, and a woman with a careful Boston accent asked if I was Henrik Vasquez. I said I was. She told me her name was Adrienne Coltrane, and she was an attorney with a firm in Back Bay, and she was sorry to be the one informing me that my former wife had passed away the previous Friday. A short illness, she said. The funeral had already been small and private, by the deceased's request. There was, however, the matter of the will. There would be a reading on the following Monday at her firm's offices, and my presence was specifically requested by name. I sat down on the kitchen chair I'd salvaged from the curb on Cedar Avenue 11 years ago and watched the rain run down the glass. Mr. Vasquez, are you still there? I told her I was. Will you be able to attend? A funny question, I thought. As if I had a calendar full of meetings. As if a 63-year-old man who delivered prepared food orders for a small catering company in the north side of Pittsburgh might need to check his commitments before flying to Massachusetts to hear what the woman who had ended his life 13 years ago had decided to say to him on her way out of the world. I told her I would be there. After I hung up, I sat for a long time. The radiator clicked on with that small mechanical sigh it always made, and I thought about how my former wife used to laugh at the radiators in our first apartment, back when we were 24 and 25, and our lives had not yet become the thing they would become. She had a way of laughing that made other people in restaurants turn around to look. That was a long time ago. I was not the same man, and she had not been the same woman for a long time before she died. I called my supervisor at the catering company, a kind woman named Bernadette, who had hired me 8 years ago, without asking too many questions about the gap on my resume, and I told her I needed 3 days off for a family matter. She said, "Take whatever you need, Henrik," and I thanked her and meant it. The next morning I caught a 6 a.m. flight out of Pittsburgh International. I had not been on an airplane in 13 years. I owned one suit, a charcoal gray thing I'd bought at the Goodwill on McKnight Road for $19 2 winters ago when I needed something to wear to Mr. Kareem's wife's funeral. I packed it in a duffel bag along with a clean shirt and a pair of dress shoes that didn't quite fit. The shoes had belonged to a man who used to live in my apartment building before he died. His daughter had given them to me when she was clearing out his things. They were a half size too big and pinched my heel, but they were polished. They would do. When I got to Boston, I took the T from the airport into the city. I had reserved a room at a small hotel in the theater district, because it was the cheapest one within walking distance of the law firm. The desk clerk was a young woman with a nose ring and tired eyes who didn't look up when she handed me my key. The room was small and smelled like industrial cleaner. I lay on the bed and watched the ceiling and tried not to think. The thing about prison is that it doesn't end when you walk out the gate. People think it does. They think you take a deep breath of free air and put it behind you, and then you start living again. That isn't how it works. What you carry out is heavier than what you brought in, because now it has shape. Now it has language. The years have arranged themselves into something you can almost hold, and you spend the rest of your life trying to figure out where to put it down. I served 11 years and 4 months at FCI Schuylkill in Pennsylvania, on a securities fraud conviction. The amount in question was just over $14 million, allegedly diverted from a client trust account at the wealth management firm where I had been a senior partner. I was an investment advisor for almost 23 years before I went in. I had built that practice from nothing, starting with 3 accounts I'd brought over from my last job at a regional bank. By the time things came apart, I was managing money for some of the most prominent families in New England. People who summered on the Cape and wintered in Palm Beach. People whose names you'd recognize. The investigation took 18 months. The trial took 6 weeks. The jury was out for less than a day. I did not contest the charges. My attorney told me I was a fool. He said the evidence was circumstantial in a dozen places, that he could find reasonable doubt in any one of them, that with the right strategy we could get a hung jury at minimum. I told him to enter a guilty plea on the central count and let the rest fall where it would. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. I never told him why. I never told anyone why. Not the prosecutor, not the judge, not the prison chaplain who used to sit with me on Tuesday afternoons in the visiting room and ask gentle questions in his soft voice. Not the parole board when I came up for early release in year 10 and was denied because I refused to express what they called appropriate remorse. Not even my attorney, who had been my friend, who I knew was hurt by my silence. I let him think I was guilty. I let everyone think I was guilty. It was easier than the alternative, and the alternative was not something I was willing to consider, no matter how often I lay awake at night with that consideration crawling around the inside of my skull like a spider. I lost my license, of course. The accountancy and securities boards pulled within a week of the conviction. After my release, I went through the long, humiliating process of petitioning for partial reinstatement of my CPA credentials, mostly because a man I'd helped inside, a former tax attorney named Vincent, who had been wrongly convicted and exonerated 3 years before me, had insisted I owed it to myself. The reinstatement came through with conditions. I could not handle client funds. I could not work in any advisory capacity. I could keep books for small businesses if a supervising CPA signed off on the work. That was it. I did not pursue it. I did not want to be near other people's money ever again. I had Bernadette's catering job, which paid me almost $22,000 a year, and I had my apartment on Federal Street with its peeling linoleum and its radiator that hissed, and I had a library card and a habit of long walks and a small circle of acquaintances who knew nothing about me beyond what I had told them, which was very little. It was enough. It had to be enough. I had not seen my daughter in 11 years. She had visited me once, in my 3rd month inside, and we had sat across from each other at a steel table in a room with fluorescent lights and a vending machine that hummed. And she had told me she was never coming back. She told me she had changed her last name. She told me her mother had explained everything. That she understood now what kind of man I really was, and that she was ashamed to have ever called me her father. She said the word ashamed twice. The second time, her voice broke on it, and I almost broke with her, almost reached across that table and told her the truth right there, but I did not. I let her leave. I let her leave because I had made a decision at the kitchen table of our house on Beacon Hill on a Sunday night in February 11 months before my arrest, and that decision had not changed just because it was hurting more than I had imagined possible. The decision was the decision. The reasons for it were the reasons. I did not get to revise them now that the cost was sitting in front of me with my eyes and her mother's mouth, telling me she hated me. She was 22 years old when she walked out of that visiting room. She was 33 on the morning I flew to Boston for her mother's will reading. I had not laid eyes on her in the 11 years between. The law firm of Halloran, Coltrane, and Wexford occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower on Boylston Street. The lobby smelled like good cologne and money. I gave my name to the receptionist, a slim young man in a tie that probably cost more than my plane ticket, and he led me down a long hallway to a conference room where 3 people were already seated. I knew 2 of them. My daughter was at the far end of the table, dressed in a dark navy suit, her hair shorter than I remembered, her face thinner. She looked up when I came in, and her expression did not change. It did not soften, and it did not harden. It simply registered me, the way you'd register a piece of furniture being moved into a room you had no plans to occupy. The man next to her was her husband. I knew this because I had seen their wedding announcement in the Globe 4 years ago, in the public library on Federal Street, on a microfilm reader I had been using to look up something else entirely, and had stumbled onto by accident, and then sat staring at for 45 minutes. His name was Theron Ashbridge. He came from a family that had owned shipping interests in Salem since before the Civil War. He was 41 years old in the photograph, and he had not aged badly in the 4 years since. He looked at me with an expression of polite disgust, the way a man looks at something a dog has tracked into the foyer. The third person was a woman I did not know, around 50, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She introduced herself as Adrienne Coltrane, the attorney who had called me. She gestured to an empty chair across from my daughter. I sat down. My daughter said, "I want to be clear that I object to his presence here." She said it to the attorney, not to me. She did not look at me when she said it. Miss Coltrane said, "Your mother's instructions on this point were specific and unambiguous, Sienna. Mr. Vasquez was to be present at the reading." Sienna. I had not heard her name spoken aloud in 11 years. The name we had chosen together at 3 a.m. in a hospital room in Cambridge, my former wife's hand in mine, the snow falling outside the window. Sienna because of the color of her grandmother's kitchen tiles, the ones her mother had grown up walking across in bare feet in the summer. Sienna because it sounded warm. We had laughed at our own sentimentality. She did not look like a Sienna anymore. She looked like a Mrs. Ashbridge. Her husband put a hand on her arm and murmured something I couldn't hear. She nodded once, sharply, and did not look at me. Mrs. Coltrane began the proceedings. She read out the standard preliminaries, the date, the place, the names of the parties. Then she opened a folder and began to read the will. The estate was substantially larger than I had expected. My former wife had been a woman of considerable independent means, even when I knew her. Her father had founded a textile importing business in the 1960s, and she had inherited a controlling interest at 26. After our divorce, she had merged the company with a larger competitor and taken stock as part of the deal, and that stock had performed extraordinarily well over the subsequent decade. There had been other investments. There had been a residential real estate portfolio in Boston and on the North Shore. There had been art. The total value of the estate, as of the date of death, was $192 million. I heard my daughter inhale sharply. Not at the number, I think. She had probably known that number. I think it was the moment of hearing it spoken aloud in a room with me in it. The will, as read, contained 3 primary bequests. Several smaller charitable disbursements were mentioned in a schedule attached as an appendix. To the Boston Symphony Orchestra, $500,000. To the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, $1 million. To a small school in Roxbury where my former wife had volunteered as a tutor in her youth, $200,000. And so on. The first primary bequest was to her sister, my former sister-in-law, who lived in Concord and who I had always genuinely liked. She received the house in Marblehead and a portfolio worth approximately $8 million. The second primary bequest was to my daughter. I watched her face as Mrs. Coltrane prepared to read it. She was sitting very straight. Her husband had taken his hand back from her arm. She was looking at the attorney with an expression of contained hunger, the look of a person who has been waiting a long time for something she believes is owed. Ms. Soaked, Coltrane read, "To my daughter, Sienna Vasquez Ashbridge, I leave the sum of $34. The room went absolutely still. $1, Miss Coltrane continued, "for each of the 34 years she has been my child." Sienna said, "What?" "That is the bequest as written. I am required to read it as written." Read the rest of it. Read the next paragraph. I am reading the bequests in the order they appear in the document. Read the rest of mine. Miss Coltrane looked down at the page. There is no rest of yours, Sienna. The bequest is as I have read it. The sum of $34. Theron Ashbridge said, "This is some kind of mistake. This must be a draft. This isn't the actual will." "It is the actual will, executed and notarized in this office on August the 14th of this year. Your mother was of sound mind, Sienna. We had her examined by a physician on the same day, as is sometimes prudent in cases of significant late changes. The examination report is in the file. She knew exactly what she was doing." Sienna had gone very pale. The skin around her mouth had a bluish cast that I remembered from when she was a child and had been frightened. "Then who?" she said. "Who gets it? The charity? Some foundation?" She wouldn't. She wouldn't. She wouldn't have. Miss Coltrane turned a page. "To my former husband, Henrik Vasquez," she read, "I leave the entire residue of my estate, which after the foregoing bequests and applicable taxes is estimated at approximately $178 million. I did not move. I felt the room stop being a room. I felt the table go away. There was a high humming in my ears that was either the lighting or my own blood. Theron Ashbridge stood up. He said something. I did not catch it. Sienna was looking at me now. For the first time in 11 years, my daughter was looking directly at me, and her face was a face I did not know, a face full of a kind of bewildered terror that aged her 10 years in a single second. No, she said. No, she said, no. He's a criminal. He stole money. He went to prison. You can't give him this. You can't. Miss Coltrane said, There is more, Sienna. Please sit down. She did not sit down. There is a letter, Miss Coltrane said. Your mother prepared a letter to be read aloud in this room at the time of the reading of the will. It is part of the testamentary instructions. I am required to read it. I would ask you, please, to be seated and to listen. Theron put his hand on her arm again, and slowly, like a person being lowered by a rope, she sat down. Her face had gone from pale to a strange chalky white. Her hands were on the table in front of her, and they were shaking. Miss Coltrane removed a sealed envelope from the folder. She broke the seal. She unfolded the pages inside. There were 5 of them, single-spaced, in my former wife's handwriting, which I would have recognized anywhere even after 13 years. Miss Coltrane began to read. To my daughter Sienna, and to anyone else gathered in this room at the time of this reading, what follows is the truth I should have told a long time ago. I am a coward, and I have lived as a coward, and I have allowed another person to bear the cost of my cowardice for 13 years. I write this knowing I will not be alive when it is read, because even now, even with the diagnosis I have been given, I cannot find the courage to say these things aloud while there is still time to face what they will cost me. The handwriting in those pages, I learned later, was the last sustained writing my former wife did in her life. She finished the letter on a Wednesday afternoon in late August. She died 8 weeks later. Henrik did not steal that money. I did. I want that recorded plainly, because anything less would be another evasion, and I have run out of time for evasions. Sienna made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something has gone wrong inside their chest. In the spring of the year, before Henrik was arrested, I made a series of unauthorized transfers from a client trust account at Henrik's firm. I will not pretend, in this letter, that it was complicated or that there were extenuating circumstances. There were not. I had taken on debt that I had concealed from him. I had made several disastrously poor private investments through a man I should never have trusted, a man named Oberon Welsh, and I owed him just over $14 million by the late winter of that year, and he was beginning to make threats. I panicked. I had access to Henrik's office and his login credentials. He trusted me completely. He had no reason not to. Ms. Coltrane paused. She was reading carefully, almost gently. She looked up once at Sienna and then continued. I did not plan it. I want that on the record too, although it doesn't matter very much. I did it over the course of 3 days. I told myself I would replace the funds before any audit. I told myself a great many things. By the time the firm's compliance officer flagged the irregularities, 6 weeks later, I had not replaced anything. I had used the money to pay Oberon Welsh and to cover several other obligations I had hidden from your father. I had known all of this for 13 years. It was still strange to hear it read aloud in a conference room on Boylston Street with my daughter 5 feet away. When Henrik discovered what I had done, he came home and sat down at the kitchen table, and he asked me one question. He asked me whether you knew. You were 19 years old. You had just been accepted into the Wharton Master's program. You had your whole life in front of you. Henrik asked me whether you knew, and I told him no, and I begged him not to tell you. I begged him not to tell anyone. I told him I would do anything. I said anything, but what I meant was, I needed him to find a way for me not to face what I had done. The handwriting, Miss Coltrane told me later, had grown more uneven on this page. I want you to understand, Sienna, that what I am about to describe was your father's idea. I did not ask him to do it. I would not have had the imagination to ask him for what he gave me. He sat at the kitchen table for several hours after I told him everything, And then he came into the living room where I was, and he told me what he had decided. He told me that if the truth came out, your career would be destroyed before it began. He told me that your name was the same as mine, that your professional contacts overlapped with the firm's clients, that the scandal would attach itself to you, whether or not you had done anything wrong. He told me that his career was over either way, that the firm would not survive, that he would lose his license and his partners and everything he had built, no matter who was charged. But, he said, if I were charged, you would lose everything you had not yet had a chance to build. The firm of Oberon Welsh's wife had several connections in the financial press in New York. The story would not be small. Your name would be in it, the internships you had lined up, the doctoral committee that had accepted you, the world you were about to enter, all of it would close to you. He told me that if he took the charges, the story would be different. It would be about an investment advisor who had failed his clients. It would not be about a wealthy society wife who had defrauded her husband's firm to pay off a private investment manager she had been hiding from the family for 2 years. It would not be a society scandal. It would be a financial industry scandal, the kind that runs once in the business pages and is forgotten in 6 months. Your name would not be in it. He told me I would have to be prepared to live with what we had done. He told me he would have to be prepared too. He told me you could never know. I agreed. Sienna had her hand over her mouth. Her husband was sitting with his hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. I agreed because I was a coward, Sienna. I want that to be clear. Your father did not save me because he loved me. He did not love me by then. I think he had stopped loving me sometime that winter, when the lies had begun to accumulate around him in a way he could feel without yet being able to name. He saved you. He took 11 years of his life away from himself, and he gave them to you, so that you could have what was supposed to be yours. I divorced him while he was inside. I did this on the advice of my own attorney, who pointed out that maintaining the marriage would draw your name into things in ways that the division of assets would not. Your father agreed without contesting any of it. He took nothing. He could have taken half of everything I had, including the inherited assets under Massachusetts law, and his attorney urged him to fight for it. He refused. He said he didn't want money he had not earned. He said he wanted you to have a clean inheritance someday, and the cleaner he was, the cleaner that inheritance would be. You believed by then that he was guilty. I had told you he was guilty. I had told you many things in those first months after his arrest, when you were frightened and confused and looking to me for an explanation. I told you he had been hiding things from us for years. I told you he had a secret life of greed and deception. I told you the reason we had not been told about any of it was that he was ashamed, that he had betrayed us, that the man we thought we knew had never really existed. None of it was true. I want you to know that as plainly as I can say it, none of it was true. Your father is the man you knew. He is exactly the man you knew. The man I described to you in those months did not exist, and I invented him, and I have lived with that invention for 13 years. I could not look at my daughter. I was looking at my hands on the table. They were shaking, but only slightly, the shaking of a man who had been waiting a long time for a wave to break. I will not ask your forgiveness, Sienna. It is not mine to ask for. What I have done to you is, in some ways, almost as great a betrayal as what I did to him. I took your father from you. I poisoned you against him with my own mouth. I let you grow into a woman who hated him for things he had not done, and I watched you do it, and I said nothing, year after year. The only defense I can offer is that I was afraid every single day that you would learn the truth and despise me for it. I hid behind my own lie because I could not face being known. I am leaving the estate to your father not because I am trying to make amends. I cannot make amends. The amends would be the 11 years, and those are spent. I am leaving him the estate because it is, by any reasonable measure, what he is owed. The estate exists, in part, because, while he was inside, I was free to manage it, and free to grow it, and free to enjoy the standing of a respected widow rather than the wife of a man in disgrace, much less the woman who deserved that disgrace. He paid for the life I have lived since. The estate is the receipt. To Sienna, I leave $34, one for each year I was your mother. I considered leaving you nothing at all, but I did not want you to think for one moment that I have forgotten you. I have not forgotten you. I think about you every day. The $34 is the only thing I am giving you that has not been bought at your father's expense. It is mine to give, the rest is not. I hope, Sienna, that you will find a way to know him. I hope you will sit across from him and look at his face and try, even for a moment, to imagine what it cost him to walk out of that visiting room 11 years ago without telling you. I hope you will understand that he could have spoken at any time and he did not, because he had decided, alone, in a kitchen on a Sunday night in February, that you are going to have a life, and you have had one. Because of him, I am sorry, Henrik. Those words are inadequate. I know they are inadequate. I am sorry. Miss Coltrane lowered the pages. The room was silent. I did not look at my daughter. I could not. I looked at the surface of the table, and I noticed for the first time that there was a small chip in the veneer near my left hand, a place where the laminate had peeled back to show the cheaper wood beneath. I looked at the chip for what felt like a long time. Theron Ashbridge stood up again, and this time he left the room. He did not say anything. He just walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft, heavy sound. Sienna had not moved. She was looking at me. I could feel it without raising my eyes. I could feel her looking at me the way I had felt the bailiff looking at me on the morning of my sentencing, with a kind of focused attention that has no intention behind it yet. That is only attention, only the act of seeing. She said, "Dad." She had not called me that in 11 years. The word came out of her like something she had to push past her teeth. I looked up. She was crying, not noisily. Tears were coming down her face in the way of a person who has not given them permission and does not know how to stop them. Her hands were still flat on the table. I said, "It's all right." It was the only thing I could think of to say. It was a stupid thing to say. It was not all right, and it had not been all right, and a sentence in a conference room was not going to change that. But I said it anyway, because she was my daughter, and she was crying, and a father says things like that, even when they are not true, even when they have not been true for a long time. "Why?" she said. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever tell me?" I took a breath. "Because you would have had to choose," I said, "between us, and whichever way you chose, you would have lost. I didn't want you to have to." She put her face in her hands. We stayed like that for a long time. Ms. Kesperty Coltrane, with great and understated kindness, gathered her papers and quietly excused herself from the room. The door closed behind her, too. Eventually, my daughter raised her face. Her makeup had run. She looked younger than 34. She looked, for an instant, like the 7-year-old who had once climbed into my lap on a porch in Maine and asked me whether the stars were people we knew who had died. "What are you going to do?" she said. I had been thinking about that question for the last 20 minutes. Ever since Miss Coltrane had read the number out loud, I had not arrived at an answer. I was not sure I needed to today. "I don't know," I said. "With the money." "I don't know. You don't have to give me anything," she said. "I don't expect anything. I'm not asking for anything." "I know that. I'm not. I know." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Some part of me wanted to stand up and walk around the table and put my arm around her and not say anything else. And some part of me knew that it had been 11 years and that walking around a table is not enough to cross 11 years. I stayed where I was. "I'm going to go home for a few days," I said. "I'm going to think about it." "Where is home?" I almost smiled at that. It was such a fair question. "Pittsburgh," I said. "I have a small apartment there." "What do you do?" "I deliver food for a catering company on the north side." She closed her eyes. "Dad." "It's a good job," I said. "I like it. I like the people." "Dad." She was crying again. I let her. After a while, I said, I don't blame you. I want you to know that. You did what you were given to do. With what you were told, none of this was your fault. Not any of it. She did not answer. I stood up. My legs felt unreliable. I walked around the table and I put my hand on the back of her chair, not touching her, just resting it there. I'd like to see you again, I said, if that's something you'd want. Yes, she said into her hands. Yes. All right then. I gathered my coat from the back of my chair and I left her there, in that conference room, with her $34 and her dead mother's letter, and the 13-year emptiness that she was going to have to learn how to refill on her own. There was no more I could do for her in that hour. I had spent 11 years and 4 months not doing anything for her, and the only way I knew how to give her something, and what came next, was going to take a different kind of doing and a different kind of patience, and we were both going to have to learn. In the lobby, I shook Messrs. Coltrane's hand and thanked her. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, Your wife wept while she dictated that letter. I want you to know that. Whatever else she was sorry. I told her I believed it. I took the tea back to the airport and I caught an evening flight to Pittsburgh. I sat by the window and watched the lights of Boston fall away beneath the wing, and then the dark shape of the country sliding by underneath, and I tried to feel something. Anything large. Anger or vindication or relief. I did not feel any of those things. What I felt was tired. The kind of tired that goes down to the bones. The kind of tired you earn over a long time and cannot shed in a single evening on an airplane. In the weeks that followed, I went back and forth with the lawyers. The estate would take time to settle, they said. There would be tax filings. There would be appraisals. I told them I was in no hurry. I kept my apartment on Federal Street. I gave Bernadette 2 weeks' notice and finished out my last Friday delivering platters of stuffed mushrooms to a corporate retreat in Sewickley. The catering staff signed a card. They thought I had inherited a small annuity from a distant relative. I did not correct them. I bought a different apartment, 2 blocks away, a little larger, with a real bedroom and a window that faced east. I gave most of the rest away. I established a fund, with the help of a young attorney in Pittsburgh who had no reason to know my history, for legal defense in cases of suspected wrongful conviction in federal financial crimes. There's more of that than people think. The fund hires lawyers. It does not get involved in the cases itself. I did not want my name on it. The lawyer I worked with, a thoughtful young woman named Marisol, agreed to serve as the public face. She thought I was eccentric. She did not press the question. My daughter came to Pittsburgh in the spring. She came alone. We had dinner at a small restaurant in Lawrenceville, a place I liked because the booths were quiet and the waiters did not hover. She told me about her work, which I learned for the first time was not in finance, as I had assumed, but in non-profit fundraising for a children's literacy organization. She had walked away from the Wharton track in her 2nd year and had never gone back. Her mother had been disappointed. She had not cared. I told her about the catering job. I told her about Mr. Kareem's grocery and the radiator and the river paths I walked on Sundays. I told her about the fund in general terms. She asked me whether I wanted her involved. I told her that was up to her. She came to Pittsburgh again in June, and again in September. We are still learning how. I am not pretending it has been easy, or that the 11 years have closed up behind us as if they had not been there. They have been there. They are still there, in the silences that fall between us sometimes, in the moments when she looks at me, and I can see her trying to fit the man across the table together with the man she had been told about, and not quite managing it. It is going to take a long time, and we may not finish in my lifetime. I do not let that stop me. I do not let it stop her either. The rain on Mr. Kareem's awnings still sounds the same as it did the morning Ms. Coltrane called. I sit by my new window in the evenings, and I listen to it sometimes, and I think about the man I was at 50, sitting at a kitchen table on Beacon Hill, deciding alone in the dark what his life was going to be for the next 11 years and 4 months. I do not regret it. I am not sure I would do it the same way if I had it to do over. I think I might find a way to tell my daughter the truth before they took me away. I think I might trust her more than I trusted her then, but I am 63 years old, and the man at that kitchen table was 50, and he did the best he could with what he understood, and what he understood was that his daughter was going to have a life, and she has had one, and now late, with whatever time is left to us, we are going to have one too. The two of us, in whatever way we can manage it. That is enough. That is more than I expected. That is, in its own quiet and unfinished way, everything. I have thought a great deal in the years since that morning on Boylston Street about the chain of small choices that brings a man to a kitchen table on a Sunday night in February with a decision in front of him that will cost him 11 years of his life. The chain is never short. It runs back further than you think. It runs back to the kind of person you decided to be when no one was watching, in your 20s, in your 30s, in the quiet hours of an ordinary marriage when nothing seemed to require courage. Those hours were the foundation. Everything I did at 50 rested on what I had practiced in the years before, when the practice felt like nothing. What I learned at FCI Schuylkill is that nothing in a person's life arrives without an antecedent. Every consequence has a cause, and most causes are not dramatic. Most causes are the small permissions we give ourselves, year after year, to look away from what we already know. My former wife did not become a person capable of taking $14 million from a client trust account in a single weekend. She became that person across 2 decades of small evasions she allowed herself, and which I, loving her badly, allowed her too. I am not innocent in the chain that put me in prison. I did not steal the money, but I had stopped paying attention long before it disappeared. And the man who stops paying attention is preparing the ground for something to grow there that he will not be able to uproot when it comes. The thing I want my daughter to take from this, if she takes anything, is that character is not a feeling. Character is what you do with the choices nobody is making you face. There were 3 things I tried to keep alive in 11 years of small rooms and bad food, and the dull hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I tried to keep my honesty, even when nobody was asking for it. I tried to keep my mind, by reading every book the library cart held, and a great many it did not. I tried to keep going, on the mornings when going was the hardest thing the day was going to ask me for. Honesty, intelligence, endurance, I do not know any other words for the work, and I do not believe any other words are needed. Sienna is 34. She has, if she is fortunate, 50 more years to practice. I am 63, and what I have left is the time that is left. Both of us are starting from where we are. The 11 years are not coming back. The lie her mother told her is not unmade by being explained. What is given to us is the work in front of us, today, with whatever strength we have today, and tomorrow, with whatever we have then. I do not know how the rest of our story ends. I am not in a hurry to know. I have learned, finally, in a way I could not have learned any sooner, that the answer to most of life's hardest questions is to keep showing up, with your hands open, and let the days do their slow, honest work on you,